Epithelial tissues. You can think of most epithelial tissues as large sheets of cells covering of your body surfaces that are exposed to the outside world and lining the inside or covering the outside of your organs. But that's not all. Epithelial tissues also line your body cavities. Epithelium also forms much of the glandular tissue in the body, but we'll talk about that in another video. Join me in this video to learn more about the covering and lining epithelial tissues. Your objectives for this video are to, number 1, explain the functions and characteristics of the connective tissues. 2, relate the structure and location of the different connective tissues to their functions. And number 3, in the lab you should be able to identify each type of connective tissue after viewing an image or a slide. As I mentioned before, connective tissues are found throughout the human body. Their main function is to connect and bind tissues and structures. We will find connective tissues sandwiched between the layers of an organ where they connect those layers and bind them together. Connective tissues also link organs together. A second function is support. Connective tissues like bone and cartilages form the framework for the body and support its weight. For example, the pelvic bones transfer the weight of your upper body to your thigh bones, which are called femurs. The femur then transfers that weight to the major bone of your lower leg, which is called the tibia, and the tibia transfers that weight to a bone in your ankle called the talus. Your connective tissues also provide protection to your internal organs and absorb mechanical shock. For example, many bones form a cage-like structure that protects delicate organs. An example of this would be your rib cage and sternum, which protect your heart, lungs, liver, and other fleshy organs. Cartilages, like those in your knee or between the bones in your spine, absorb mechanical shocks to your body when you walk or run or jump. Many of your connective tissues also house immune system cells that spring into action and protect your body from invading microorganisms. A final function to remember is that your connective tissues, well, one in particular, are involved in transporting substances like oxygen, carbon dioxide, minerals, hormones, vitamins, and nutrients to all parts of your body. Any idea which tissue that might be? Did you say blood? If so, you are absolutely correct. Blood is the connective tissue that is involved in transport. A handy mnemonic device to remember the functions of connective tissues was provided by a student in class last semester. This device is containers and bins transport products and supplies. Do you remember what functions the red letters on this slide correspond to? The con in containers stands for connect. Bin means bind. Transport, well, obviously that's transport. Pro stands for protect, and sup stands for support. Like all tissues, human connective tissues consist of cells that are surrounded by an extracellular matrix, or ECM. This ECM consists of ground substance and embedded protein fibers. What makes this tissue different from your epithelial tissues is that the ECM is visible and can be used to distinguish between one connective tissue and another. Connective tissues are grouped into two categories that differ in the types of cells present and the components or appearance of their ECM. These categories are connective tissue proper and specialized connective tissue. Let's take a look at them individually. Connective tissue proper is also known as general connective tissue. It is often involved in connecting and binding the layers of an organ together or connecting organs together. This type of connective tissue is located throughout the body and in some cases forms the internal structure of some organs. Connective tissues are defined by their cells in ECM. There are two types of cells in these tissues, resident and migrant. Resident cells are those cells that are permanently located in the tissue, and migrant cells are those that can leave a tissue and go to another area of the body depending upon the circumstances at a given time. Fibroblasts are the most common resident cell. They are mature cells that have the properties of an immature cell, which we'll call a blast cell. Fibroblasts make protein fibers and ground substance, the components of the ECM in a connective tissue. As long as they're alive, they will continually produce collagen fibers. Adipocytes, or fat cells, are resident cells found in many different connective tissues. The cytoplasm of each cell is filled with a single large lipid inclusion, like this one. These cells provide energy storage, but may cushion an organ or a structure when they're present in large amounts. Mast cells are the largest of your resident cells. These are immune system cells that are filled with cytosolic inclusions called granules. In this picture, they are stained blue. Granules contain chemical messengers like histamine, which act on blood vessels and other cells to promote inflammation. Inflammation is a protective response that activates the immune system to heal and repair tissues or fight off invading microorganisms before they can cause an infection. Phagocytes are immune system cells. They ingest foreign substances, old organelles, microorganisms, and dead or dying cells by a process called phagocytosis. Your phagocytes include your macrophages, which are either resident or migrant cells, and neutrophils, which are migrant cells. Other immune system cells can also migrate into and out of connective tissues, depending upon a body's needs. Now let's look at the tissues. There are four basic types of connective tissue proper. They are loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, reticular tissue, and adipose tissue. Remember, I will describe the tissue and tell you about its function and locations. You will need to be able to recognize the tissues when you see them in the lab, and you will need to remember locations and functions for the lecture portion of your class. This is loose connective tissue, aka areolar tissue. You'll know it when you see it because it consists mostly of ground substance, so all of these white spaces here represent the ground substance. And embedded within the ground substance, we're going to have three types of protein fibers. You'll have your collagen fibers, which are usually quite thick, and they look like pink strands that run through the slide. You'll have your elastic fibers, which are usually darkly stained purple, and they look like thin threads. And then you'll have reticular fibers, which are a type of collagen fiber that's highly branched. You'll also see different types of cells embedded within the ECM. You'll see fibroblasts, which are usually recognized by their roughly circular to ovoid dark purple nuclei. Occasionally you'll see adipocytes, which may look like little white circles. And then you'll see sometimes immune system cells within these slides as well. Your areolar or loose connective tissue is found beneath the epithelium of the skin and in membranes lining your body cavities. You'll also find this tissue within the walls of your hollow organs. There, it functions to support blood vessels that are vital to the avascular epithelial tissues nearby. It also helps to house immune system cells that are ready to jump into action should the tissue become infected with unwanted microorganisms. This is another figure that shows your loose or areolar connective tissue. Again, notice how much ground substance is present here. Can you identify the fibers and the cells? This is an image from a cadaver. Here you can see the epithelial layer of the skin on top. That's this rectangle. And just deep to that, this kind of whitish layer, that is the areolar tissue, the loose connective tissue. The next tissues are called dense connective tissues or fibrous connective tissues because they consist mostly of protein fibers. These tissues are grouped into three classes. You have the dense irregular collagenous tissue, the dense regular collagenous tissue, and your dense regular elastic tissue. Let's take a look at them. Dense irregular collagenous tissue has an extracellular matrix that consists of collagen bundles arranged in three different directions. This tissue provides strength that helps the tissue resist pulling or tension in all three planes of movement. This tissue is usually found in areas where tissues get pulled in multiple directions, such as the dermis of the skin and the capsules that surround our joints. At the bottom of this slide, you can see an image of this tissue. Notice how the thick pink collagen fiber bundles swirl around in an irregular way. The swirls almost look like the waves on an angry sea of ground substance. To the left, you can see the dense irregular connective tissue just under the areolar tissue, and that is just deep to the superficial skin. This is dense, regular, collagenous connective tissue. Like the dense irregular, the ECM of this tissue is composed largely of thick collagen bundles that are stained pink here. But here, the collagen bundles are arranged in a parallel fashion. This provides a great amount of resistance to pulling, but only in one plane. You find this type of tissue in tendons and ligaments that are usually only pulled in one direction. Tendons are connective tissues that connect muscles to bone, and ligaments are connective tissues that mostly connect bone to bone. In the figure on the left, as muscles of the forearm contract, they pull on the tendons here. This pulls the tendons in a proximal direction towards the midline of the body. This type of movement helps to move our bones. And this is dense regular elastic tissue. Like the other two types of tissues, protein fibers are prominent in the ECM here. The dark squiggly strands that you see, like this one, are elastic fibers. They provide stretch and recoil to tissues. Mixed in with the elastic fibers are randomly oriented collagen fibers that help prevent the tissue from tearing. Notice that the cells are not prominently featured here, but they are present. This type of tissue is found in the walls of organs that must stretch to perform their function, like large blood vessels, such as the aorta, which you see here, and certain ligaments. Reticular tissue is composed of branched collagen fibers called reticular fibers. These fibers form a network that can support small structures such as blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. They are also found in lymph nodes in the spleen, where they form a web-like net that traps old and foreign cells. If you follow the dark green collagen or reticular fibers here, you can see that they branch in many directions. So it's not hard to imagine that this would form a network or a net of fibers that hold cells like this one in place. Adipose tissue consists of fat-storing adipocytes plus fibroblasts and ECM. Adipocytes can increase in size to the point where fibroblasts and ECM are scarcely visible. The functions of adipose tissue include fat storage. Adipose tissue is a major energy reserve for the body. Insulation. Adipose tissue helps us retain warmth, and shock absorption and protection. There are two types of adipose tissue, brown and white. White adipose tissue is the most common in adults and appears, well, white or yellow. White fat's primary functions are to store energy, cushion, and produce hormones that are then secreted into the bloodstream. The adipocytes of this tissue have one large lipid inclusion that can grow in size. This tissue is found deep to the skin, where it is called subcutaneous fat, but it is also found in the abdomen, the breasts, the hips, the buttocks, and the thighs. White adipose tissue that surrounds the heart and abdominal organs is called visceral fat. Visceral fat is very unhealthy. It can impair organ function and has been linked to increased insulin resistance and increased risk for heart attack and stroke. Brown fat, also called brown adipose tissue, is a special type of body fat that is activated when you get cold. Brown fat produces heat to help humans maintain their body temperature in cold conditions. It is found commonly in newborns, children, and hibernating animals. Brown fat stores decline in adults, but they still help with warmth. Research out of Harvard Medical School suggests that brown fat is more active in people in Boston in the colder months. Brown fat appears brown because it contains multiple lipid inclusions and may have many more mitochondria than does white fat. Mitochondria are the engines in brown fat that burn calories to produce heat. Brown fat has generated interest among researchers because it appears to act a lot more like muscle than fat and may be able to use regular body fat, that's the white fat, as fuel. In addition, exercise may stimulate hormones that activate brown fat. It's too soon to know whether brown fat's calorie burning properties, however, can be harnessed for weight loss. So now, let's try a few practice questions. Here's the first one. I'll read the question. Pause the video, think of your answer, and then join me when you're ready to see if you're right. Which of the following tissues is the most abundant and widely distributed? Would that be epithelial, connective, muscle, or nervous tissue? Number 2, connective tissue, is the correct answer here. Connective tissues are the most abundant throughout the body. Remember, connective tissues include your bones, your cartilages, your fats, your blood, and a whole host of other tissues. You would expect to find blank fibers in areas that undergo a lot of stretch and rebound. Would that be elastic, collagen, reticular, or white? Did you say elastic? If you did, that's correct. I like to think about the elastic on a pair of shorts or on a pair of underwear. You can stretch the waistband on a pair of shorts, for example, and then if you let it go, it snaps back into its original shape. The same is true for tissues that have elastic fibers in them. They stretch and then snap back into shape. One of the best examples of this is the aorta. The aorta is a large blood vessel that comes off of the heart. Every time the heart contracts to squeeze blood out, the aorta has to stretch to accommodate blood flow and then recoil to get its shape back. This helps pump the blood from the heart further to the rest of the body. Of the following cell types, which are found patrolling areas exposed to harmful bacteria? Do you think that's fibroblasts, osteocytes, macrophages, or chondroblasts? Macrophages and neutrophils are the bacteria slayers. They patrol areas exposed to harmful bacteria and then phagocytize those cells to protect the body from infection. So in this video, we've talked a bit about the functions of connective tissue. Remember, some of the functions are it helps to contain and bind some of the organs and tissues in the body. It's involved in transporting substances from one location to another. It protects the body from insult, and it also helps support all of your body structures and give the body its forms. We talked about the characteristics of connective tissues also, so remember that there's a bit more diversity in the types of cells that we're going to see here. So we've got things like adipocytes, fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells, and other types of cells. One other characteristic is that we're going to see lots of extracellular matrix, lots of ECM, and what's most important here is that the ECM contains these protein fibers, and it's through the amount and types of protein fibers that you can start to get a clue as to what kind of connective tissue you're looking at. Remember, your protein fibers are going to be things like collagen, which gives a tissue strength so that it can resist compression, but also resist pulling and tension. You've got your elastic fibers, which are specifically in tissues to allow the tissue to stretch, but also to recoil and reassume its shape. You've got reticular fibers that make framework. These are branched collagen fibers. They make a framework or support network for cells within tissues and organs. So you really want to pay attention to what types of cells and protein fibers you see in these tissues. We talked a little bit about the structure and location of some of these connective tissues as related to their function, and we're not spending a whole lot of time talking about the visual characteristics of the tissues, but we did touch on that as well. Remember, the main place that you're going to need to be able to identify the tissues when you see them is going to be in the lab for your practicals. So I hope this video was helpful. Again, we only did the connective tissue proper here. The next video will be your specialized connective tissues. I look forward to seeing you there. If you have any questions, don't forget, you can always contact me by email or text. I'm more than happy to answer any questions and address any concerns that you might have. All right, see you at the next video.